Hi everyone, welcome to Module 4 of Public Speaking. Today we're going to be talking about communication apprehension, which is communication anxiety and the anxiety that we get from public speaking. This is really important and probably one of the most important lectures because everybody has a bit of anxiety when speaking. Some people a little bit less than others, but for the most part, in a certain context, situation, a feeling of uncertainty happens or a feeling of nervousness happens. And those that say that they're very good at public speaking will be hit with this situation at some point throughout their career or some point throughout their life where it's hard to speak in a public context. And so today is a really important lecture going over what we can do, some strategies to take on communication apprehension. And in order to understand those strategies, we also are going to dive a little bit deep into the different types of communication anxiety that we have throughout our lives. So, managing your speech anxiety, communication apprehension. So, before we start this lecture, I want you to go through and make sure that you took the quiz that we have on Blackboard, the PRCA quiz. This kind of gives you a gauge on what type of communication apprehension you have and how high your levels are. This is really important before we go through this lecture because if you have really high anxiety in one area or you notice it's low in a certain area, then there are going to be parts of this lecture that are going to apply to you a lot more. And then you'll know what types of tips and strategies you need to take throughout this course in order to get better at it and practice, being able to get past the communication apprehension, because it's not that it ever goes away. You will always have some form of it, but there are strategies that we can take to bring it down. So kind of to define communication apprehension, we have Mikrowski and Virginia Richmond who say an individual's fear or anxiety associated with the real and anticipated communication with other persons. So whenever you have a situation that you're in where you're communicating with others and you kind of feel nervous, when you're talking with a close friend, this happens a lot less. Unless you're uncertain about what you're talking about, you can be a little more nervous, or if you kind of mess up a fact or what you're saying, that can make you a little more nervous too. But this is more when I'm going to discuss it in a large context. So a larger room, kind of like what we're doing in class, the six to nine people, depending on which groups you're in for your speeches. So normally when you give a presentation in person, you'll be in a class of 25 or more. At your job, it's probably going to be larger group settings rather than smaller group settings when giving a presentation. So think about the way that this can apply not only to large groups, but small groups. So 20% of the general population suffer from higher levels of communication apprehension. This is not just the average amount of communication apprehension. This is a large, high levels of communication apprehension, high levels of anxiety when in a group setting. Just to put in context, I think that it's good to know that public speaking is an extremely important class when it comes to just being able to figure out how to formulate speeches in a way that you feel more prepared. And when you feel more prepared and practice giving these speeches in front of each other, then that really helps with higher levels of communication apprehension because you know what to do in the future. And Bill Gates said one of the greatest classes he ever took was public speaking. It was the best class he has ever invested in. And it's because it taught him how to really communicate with others in large group settings and get past anxiety, the anxiety of public speaking. So this class is really important. If you've found in that PRCA that you have higher levels of communication apprehension, just know you're in the right class in order to help you with that. So there are 4 different types of communication apprehension. There's trait-like, context-based, audience-based, and situational. Starting with trait-like, it refers to a relatively enduring personality type orientation towards a given mode of communication across a wide variety of contexts. So trait anxiety is looking more at the way that people are disposed to communication, or communication apprehension, the way that people generally feel across situations and time periods. So are you a little more anxious when you're around people, or just kind of in general? Do you feel uncomfortable when you have to speak in any type of context? This is more just who you are. Now, because you have a little more anxiety, if you're more trait-like based, that's okay. It's okay to feel anxious in a lot of these types of situations, because there's a lot of things that we can do to help you, even if you are still feeling uncomfortable, feel comfortable enough with your speech. And so, you're still going to have to public speak. Even if you're the person that's shy and wants to hide under a table, you're still going to have to speak in a public setting at some point in your life. And so this will give you a lot of confidence when you're feeling nervous. This will give you experience and skills that you can take into these speeches to make you feel a little less anxious about that public speaking situation that you will be in. Context-based situations are relatively enduring personality type orientation towards communication in a given context, usually based on types of communication settings. So, for example, if we're in a setting that is more formal, or you have formality issues that you're not used to, you're standing at a podium in a big stage in a large auditorium, all eyes on you, versus, standing in a classroom and being able to speak to your class about who you are, like the introduction speech. The type of formality can change the context of the situation, changing your anxiety. So there might be certain situations where you're totally fine, you're okay with speaking, but then again, the formality of a situation can also cause increased levels of communication apprehension. Uncertainty about situations, that type of context, is also something that can increase levels of context-based communication apprehension. In order to work with uncertainty, that just means that you probably need to practice more, and practice in the setting that you're in, because remember, this is context. If you're not sure where you're giving your speech or how you are going to deliver that speech in a certain room, go into the room ahead of time and practice doing it. In this class, I have all of the conference videos. You're allowed to get in them 30 minutes early. So if you find a buddy in the class, pair up, go on early, 30 minutes early, and practice giving your speech through the video, and watch yourself do it, and look back on it after you do it, and get a little bit of feedback from your buddy to see if there's something about the room that makes you feel a little uncertain, or if there's a way that you can do it that makes you less uncertain, right? So figuring out the context of where you're going to be and getting an eye for the room, what your delivery is going to look like. Close your eyes for a few minutes and picture yourself giving that speech, because this will help with a lot of uncertainty when you're nervous about the context of the situation that you're in. The last thing I kind of want to talk about for context-based is the novelty of a situation. There's very high tension communication settings that creates a context for higher anxiety. It's one thing to be in the finals of a speech activity, or in a context situation where you're giving a job interview, your first job interview ever. And so these are the types of situations that are very important to you, and can increase your anxiety as well. In order to cope with this kind of anxiety, you just have to remember that the skill that you will learn in this class, but also skills over how to deliver correctly, or, take a minute, close your eyes and breathe before you open it up. Do a little meditation when you're in a high anxiety, high novelty context, because this is the only way that you're able to kind of get past that. Changing your mindset too. Instead of saying, I'm so nervous, say, I'm so excited. Even though you might not be excited necessarily, it will kind of flip that switch in your head, thinking this is going to be great, and keeping that positive mindset throughout your speech. That way you don't let the bad green monster of anxiety overcome you. All right. And we have audience-based communication apprehension. So audience-based communication apprehension is more for a specific group of people. So say you're giving a speech in front of your boss. It's going to feel different when you're practicing it at home with your significant other. The type of audience-based communication apprehension is that group of people. And in order to feel a little bit better about that group of people, I would recommend talking with your audience before your speech. Walking into the room and, meeting a few people around the room and making sure that you have a few people in your corner. I think this is the best way to get past that audience-based anxiety, because then you have a couple friends that you can look at in the crowd. When you're delivering your speech, find those people and hold your eye contact and make sure that they're different people around the room. That way you're delivering to the wide variety of audience instead of one specific area. But, you find a group and you walk into that group and you talk to them for a little while can really ease a lot of anxiety over just the audience in itself. The last type of communication apprehension is situational. So this is when you have transitory orientation towards communication with a given person or a group of people, a response to situational constraints. So this is kind of like that in the moment anxiety. This is the type of anxiety you get when there's a certain influence that happens right there at that time and context that has just made you super nervous. Whether, it's you're talking to your subordinates and your boss walks in the room and then you get nervous and you have to think about what you're saying. This situational context happens to me when we're doing evals. I'm really great at teaching my class, but when I have a teacher walk in and start doing my teaching eval in the middle of class, that will make me respond a little more anxiously to that situational constraint that just happened. So look through your PRCA scores and see if you're moderately high, or high. And don't let this bring you down. If you score low, we found that people that score low do worse in this class because they stop trying. They don't try. They're not nervous about it. There's a very little practice that happens. So if you scored low, this doesn't mean that you don't need to practice, but this means you have a little less constraints on getting better. When you're really, really high, that means that there's something you have to push past, and you really are going to have to practice a lot more because you don't have less constraints. If you're moderately high or high, please, please, please do not let this discourage you from doing this class. This just means you need a little bit of practice with your delivery, with your contextual and trait-based and situational and audience-based communication apprehension. So, come into the class a little bit early, 30 minutes early, make friends in class when we're doing our video conferences, and really push people and help people when you're in these types of situations to make you feel a little bit better about who you're around and the context of the situation that you're in. You'll want to do this in person too. When we get back to being in person, you'll want to go into a room early, gauge the room, and practice your delivery a lot. People that are moderately high, there are some points in which I see nervousness, but it's also hidden a lot too. If you're not writing down word for word and making sure your speech is absolutely perfect, when I'm grading these, I do, but when I'm not writing these and I just rewatch it, I can't tell the difference between someone that is moderately high from moderately low. So just remember, like, I don't want to say it's all in your head, but there's a way to get out of your head when you are very anxious about these situations. So speak with confidence, reframe your thoughts. Like I said earlier, don't say you're nervous, say you're excited. Focus on that audience and that topic and not on yourself when you're giving your speech. Don't throw yourself off by thinking about that, what you said or where you did. You don't have to be perfect. Prepare, practice. This is extremely important, and make sure you're practicing that delivery.